Number 1. The Walker. There are always some things that everyone associates with the different seasons. You have snow in winter. Everything comes back to life in the spring. You see baseball in the summer. And most people associate cooling air and leaves turning brown and falling from the trees with autumn. Not me, though. I always knew that it was fall when the Walker came back. The Walker was just a nickname that we gave to this guy who, you guessed it, that we would always see going for a walk every evening during the fall. He was an older man, but not like a senior or anything, maybe in his late 40s, but starting on the autumnal equinox, he would begin taking a walk around the neighborhood about an hour before sunset. He would keep this up until the winter solstice, no kidding. Right then, he would stop. I remember him from when I was about 5 years old, and it never failed. He would do this every year. We never talked to the man. I never saw anyone approach him at all. He never even looked at us when he was out for his walk. Of course, when you have someone like that in your neighborhood, both adults and children begin telling stories about him. People like to spread nonsense about antisocial types. The rumors about the guy range from being as simple as a man whose wife died in the fall to him being a psychotic war veteran. Among us children, however, the stories were a bit more severe. Some people said that he was a child molester, or even a child murderer, out looking for his victims. Some of the more imaginative kids thought he was some sort of monster. There was a very popular story among my friends that the guy was a werewolf who was depressed because he killed his wife, and as a result he spent the fall days walking around the block mourning her. Well, I guess I only gave the stories about as much validity as any kid would have. Or any rational kid. I didn't believe them. I guess I just thought he was a guy who probably liked the fall and went for a walk after he got off of work. He probably didn't really like hot or really cold weather, so he didn't go for walks during the winter or summer. Everything everyone said about him was just them making up stories about someone they didn't know. When I was 13, my friends and I were playing at the park. It was in the fall. The leaves had been falling for weeks. We were playing some no-rules football in the leaves. Off in the distance, one of my friends noticed that the Walker was coming in our direction. My friends began making all sorts of comments about him. They were calling him a freak, among other really unflattering names. I told my friends to stop it. He was just a guy who went for a walk through the neighborhood every day in the fall. I told them to stop spreading lies about him. Of course, my friends took offense to this. You know how kids are. When you challenge their misinformation, they will try and defend it. Basically, one of my friends said to me, "If you don't believe the guy is a psychopath, why don't you go up and talk to him?" I really didn't want to, but I guess that I didn't really have an excuse as to why not. So I said that I would. When the Walker got close to the park, I slowly began walking up to him. I actually felt a little scared and wasn't sure why. I guess it was just apprehension about talking to someone I had never talked to before. Anyway, I walked up to him and gave him a smile and said, "Hey man, how's it going?" Quicker than I ever would have imagined it was possible, the man grabbed me by the arm, and with his other arm, he pulled something out of his jacket pocket and stuck me in the arm with it. My friends saw what was happening, and they ran towards the Walker, yelling at him. He let go of me and ran off. A couple of my friends threw rocks at him. When I saw what he had stuck in my arm, I almost had a heart attack. It was a dirty syringe, and he had stuck it in deep. It scared the crap out of me. I had to have my mom take me to the hospital and we had to call the police. Apparently, it was a used heroin needle. Fortunately, I didn't get any disease, although there was some trace of heroin in my system. The guy was arrested, of course, and we pressed charges. You know, it's funny when you try to be a good person, and you realize that those not being good people were the ones who ended up being right. Number 2. The Apple Orchard. I really love apples. I live really close to a local apple orchard. Every fall, the orchard allows people to pay a fee, come into the orchard and pick their own apples. It's pretty fun, and you can get a lot of apples for a pretty cheap price. The biggest problem, though, is that the orchard is so popular that when it first opens to the public in the fall, it gets extremely crowded. I hate being around so many people. It just makes me anxious. However, if you don't get to the orchard early on in the first few days, you will miss out on the best apples. So one fall, I thought I had an ingenious, if not completely illegal and unethical, idea as to how I could get the apples I wanted. My uncle is one of those anti-government militia type guys, and he had a pair of night vision goggles. I thought I'd sneak into the orchard, get the apples I want, then come back the next day and pay the fee but not take any apples. The orchard really wasn't protected in any serious way. I could get in very easily. However, I couldn't take a flashlight, 'cause that would certainly give me away. So I got the goggles, and I have to tell you, if you've never used them before, they're pretty damn awesome. And it's not really like you see in the movies. Everything is much sharper and clearer than you see in the movies. It's amazing what you can see and how clearly you can see it. Anyway, I snuck into the apple orchard with no problem. I had my big bushel basket, and I went about picking the apples that I wanted. I had been in the orchard for a little over 30 minutes when I climbed up into one of the trees to get some apples that hadn't fallen off yet. Then, I heard what sounded like a rustling in the leaves covering the ground. Alarmed, I turned around and saw the hugest and scariest looking man that I had ever seen in my entire life. He was really tall and really fat, and was carrying a flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. I froze in the tree, immediately regretting being the stupid idiot I was for doing this in the first place. I tried to remain still so the man wouldn't shine the flashlight over at me. I had no idea if he worked for the orchard or if maybe he had broken in like me. Either way, while he was walking around with a knife in his hand in the pitch-black night, I really didn't want to find out. The man came closer and closer, shining the flashlight around. It took every ounce of control that I had to keep from shaking or making any noise. This got harder and harder as the man came closer and closer. After a while, he finally made it over to the tree that I was in. I had to do everything I could to not shake the tree because I was definitely shaking myself. I watched as he went over to my basket, looked at it, then covered the area with the flashlight. He then stood there for a moment. I swear to God that I thought I was going to pee myself right there. It took everything I could manage to keep myself from moving and shaking that tree. I kept waiting for the man to shine the flashlight up at me. I just knew he would. But after a minute that seemed like it had lasted for several hours, he simply kicked my basket over, scattering the apples all over the ground. He then began walking off in a different direction, obviously looking for me somewhere else. I also didn't know how long I waited there after the man left. I wanted to get down out of that tree and get the hell out of that orchard. But I thought that if I did, he would be on his way back and he'd catch me. After a very long period of time, I did get out of the tree very quietly, got my basket, and carefully made my way out of the orchard. As my feet crushed every leaf, I was scared and I jumped, thinking the man was coming back for me. But I got out of there okay. Now, if this wasn't scary enough, the next day when I went to the apple orchard, prepared to pay my fee, the orchard was closed. The old man who owned the orchard and lived in a farmhouse right on the side of it had been stabbed to death the previous night. I did get my answer to whether or not the guy who I had seen worked there, though. He obviously did not. Oh, and yes, lest you think otherwise, I did give a description to the police. As far as I'm aware, they never caught the guy, but at least they didn't think it was me that did it. Number 3. The backyard. My best friend growing up was a guy named Joey. We were friends for as long as I could remember. Starting back when we were around 8 years old, we started the age-old ritual of having sleepovers. We had a sleepover at least once a month. The strange thing was, though, that all the sleepovers were always at my house. I'd never really thought about it much until I was around 11 years old. We were talking about having a sleepover on Halloween, which was only a few weeks away, and Joey began asking me what my mom would be making for our Halloween dinner. It was then that I finally brought it up to Joey. I asked him why we never had the sleepovers at his place. Right away, he seemed like he didn't really want to talk about sleepovers anymore. He just changed the subject. I didn't want to press it at the time, so I just let it go. A couple days later, after school, Joey and I were walking home together. I remember this very vividly because it was one of those days when the leaves were constantly falling from the trees, almost like it was raining leaves. Joey told me that he was sorry that he hadn't answered my question the other day. He said that he never wanted anyone to come over to his house overnight because he believed that his shed was haunted. I was a bit confused. I had heard of houses being haunted. I had heard of schools and theaters being haunted. But I had never heard of anyone saying that they had a haunted shed. I wondered that even if his shed had been haunted, why is it that this would keep him from wanting to have a sleepover at his place? He told me that the only time he had seen the ghost was when his older brother had sleepovers, so he thought that it would happen if he had anyone over. Still, he told me that he wanted to do the Halloween sleepover at my place, but if I wanted to stay over during the current weekend, he would be okay with that. So that Friday night, instead of going home, I walked with Joey over to his house. Although I hadn't ever slept there, I had hung out with him there several times, but we had a good and fun evening. I didn't want to piss him off, but I was really super curious about the ghost. So after we were alone and watching some movies, I asked Joey about the ghost. He immediately didn't seem like he was having a good time anymore. "It's in the shed," Joey said. "If you want to watch the shed from my bedroom window, you can." I sort of did, and I sort of didn't. But I could tell talking about it was really upsetting my best friend, so I dropped it. We just went back to enjoying ourselves. When we went to sleep in Joey's room, he fell asleep in the bed pretty quickly. I didn't, though. I was hanging out in my sleeping bag. I couldn't get the idea of the ghost out of my head. I didn't necessarily believe in ghosts myself. I thought that whatever Joey had been seeing, There must be an explanation for it. Anyway, when I was sure he was asleep, I went and looked out the window. There was a light from the back of the house that shone on the backyard, right towards the shed. I sat there for about 10 minutes, wondering what it was that my friend Joey had seen before. If this ghost only appeared on sleepover nights, it made sense to me that it was probably just Joey's brother trying to scare him. I sat there for another 10 minutes before I decided to give up and go back to bed. But right then, I saw something in the backyard. It was a humanoid-like figure, wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, crawling from the backyard on his hands and knees. It moved very slowly, almost deliberately, with weird, jerky movements. It made its way over to the shed. It pried the doors open and slipped inside. Needless to say, I was absolutely freaked out. I quickly went over to my sleeping bag, crawled in, and pulled the sleeping bag over my head. It took me forever to fall asleep, and when I did, it wasn't very good sleep either. The next morning, I told Joey about what I had seen. He confirmed that this was what he had saw the previous times. Now, an 11-year-old is probably a lot more likely than an adult to believe that he actually saw a ghost. I was freaked out. But as I mentioned before, this only seemed to happen on sleepover nights, and Joey had an older brother. Looking back, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some sort of trick. Or maybe it was a ghost. Who knows? But it was pretty scary. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the button next to the tabby to be informed of new content. Please feel free to share this video with others who might enjoy it, and follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. I want to extend a very special thank you to Al, one of my long-term subscribers. Thanks to several donations that he made to my channel, I was able to buy a new computer to make these videos. I'm sure that some of you have noticed that I've had a lull in videos over the summer months. This was mainly due to my problems with my previous computer. At times it would frustrate me so severely that it became a pain to try and produce videos. Thanks to Al, I have a much better computer now, which has been making these videos much easier. So, he's directly responsible to the increase in content that I intend to have going forward. If you have a story that you'd like narrated by Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the email in the description. I am particularly looking for supernatural stories at the moment. I want to include these in my 100 Ghostly Tales Halloween special. But in the meantime, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.